I do want to launch in. I think all of us have been a part of a game or some sort of competition that maybe got a little out of hand. In our home, we didn't play a lot of Monopoly, and my mom loved to tell the story of my dad flipping over the board one time when he was getting beaten. Yeah, that was a part of the mythology of our family. My dad's probably watching this. I think my mom and dad keep our live stream going because they're every week, So I'm sure my mom's just loving this right now. But he would flip over the board, and so my mom would always tell that story. Or maybe if you play sports casually, a pickup basketball game that got a little heated. For me, I actually did not play sports in high school, and everyone's supposed to be like, oh, that's so surprising. No. I was sort of a drama music kid, and so I didn't get a chance to be in competitive situations, right, where the blood gets hot. In show choir, there's not really moments where you're really, a lot of sequence, not a lot of competitive juices, And so I went and played softball with a buddy of mine. He needed one more. They put me as catcher because I guess I could do limited damage as catcher. And so we played this one team, and these guys, trying to find a nice way to say it in church, they took the game a little too seriously. They were chirping at the ref. They were being jerks. I'm just going to say they were being jerks. They were not being very kind. And so I was getting real frustrated. I was talking with this one guy. And so we went through the line, and I maybe gave him a little too hard of a hand slap. I was trying to be like, we're good, right? Maybe not. Anyway, so people had to step in between us. At that point, I was a pastor on staff at a church, so that would have been really great. Pastor starts fight at, softball game. But he was really ready to fight me. And sometimes people just can get competitive. Not always is that some sign of who you are as a person. But I think sometimes when people kind of lose the plot a little bit, it's because they're playing for different reasons, right? The stakes are different. Because some of us play to win, and that's good, but some of us play for worth, right? For some of us, we want to win. It'd be nice if we like the feeling of winning. For other people, they need to win, because if they don't, it means something about them. There's something inside of some people that just hates losing. It almost causes them physical pain. In their mind, they're only as valuable as their last win, their last victory. And all throughout that game, I was telling that guy, hey man, just relax. And from experience, that does not ever help anybody relax. And so if you tell these people to relax, it only seems to raise the temperature. And we all know people like this, right? There's a drivenness to them. There's an insistence that they be the best. They need to be impressive and successful. They don't even know why someone would do something that they weren't good at, right? Just to do something for fun. It's winning. Winning's fun. Like nothing else is fun. Winning is fun. Now, if you guys are lucky enough to have seen the Oscar award-winning movie Talladega Nights, you'll know why I've been waiting, trying to find a way to quote this. But in the movie, Ricky Bobby is talking to his dad, and what a great name, Ricky Bobby. Yes. And his dad says to him, if you ain't first, you're last. If you ain't first, you're last. And so Ricky actually takes this and makes this kind of the mantra of his whole life, to the point where he would rather crash in a race than be average. What's funny is at the end of the movie, he meets up with his dad, and his dad's like, man, I just made that up. That doesn't even make sense. There's first, there's second, there's third. But he kind of does his whole life like this. If you're not first, you're last. But if we're being honest, a lot of us know a lot of Ricky Bobbies, right? If you're not first, you're last. And a lot of these people, they grew up in homes with very high standards. And they may have had these high standards in every area. Maybe it was just in one or two areas that were very important. But in homes like these, when you do well, there's a lot of celebration. There's a lot of pats on the back, and you feel like you're flying high. But when you fail, there's sort of a distance that happens from the parents, right? You didn't live up to expectations. It's almost as if when you're not crushing it, you don't exist. In houses like this, awards are praised, achievements are recognized and put up on the wall. Sometimes sibling rivalry is encouraged. And when you underperform, it's a big problem. These are the households that kind of create these type of people. If you grew up in this type of household, maybe it was in athletics, but maybe it wasn't. Maybe it was academics. Maybe it was music or art where this was, sometimes in a weird way in Christian homes, even spirituality, right? We compare, how spiritual are you compared to your brother or your sister? And even though you're doing your best, maybe that brother or sister is just a little bit nicer at church, and you can feel kind of the ordering. In these homes, everything is an opportunity to be excellent. Everything is high stakes. And if you're like this, the question driving you as we talk about these primal questions is, am I successful? Ironically, somebody stopped me today and said, hey, you're doing my question today. You better not mess it up. And I was like, that's ironic. Mr. Am I successful? But the question that this person asks is, am I talented? Am I accomplished enough for others to admire me? These people truly believe, and they think, will people still want to be around me if I don't deliver? Would anybody be interested in me if I'm not impressive? And here's the deal. If you're this type of person, as you've gotten older, hopefully you're no longer flipping over Monopoly boards. But you do bring your best to everything you do. And for you, it just blows your mind that not everybody is looking at every opportunity as a chance to squeeze out like every drop, right? You think that everybody walks into a situation and tries to pinpoint ways that we could be more effective and more efficient. Everybody thinks you're mean. You're like, I'm not mean. I just have high standards. Isn't pursuing excellence what life is all about? And for those of us who don't have that question, we're all going, no, not all of us think that way. It's okay that you're okay at pickleball. You need to calm down. But here's the hard part. If you are this way, it makes you incredibly successful. I truly think some of the people that we look up to in our culture, we're going to talk about this being a little bit of a problem, are some of those people, right? We celebrate. I mean, the Olympics just ended. I imagine a lot of those people have very high standards for themselves. You almost need to reach that high of heights. So it is celebrated in this culture. And we're actually going to talk about someone in the Bible who may have had this primal question. But the hard thing about a person who asks this question is that it does take a toll. If your brain is like this, it's hard to shut your brain off. When you're with your family, your mind is elsewhere. You're trying to sleep, your mind is elsewhere. Sometimes you lose track of time when you're working, and the people in your life would say, they honestly think you care more about your work than you do about them. And in your heart, you really believe you're doing it for them, and yet your family, your friends are protesting, wanting more of you. It's exhausting to run this hard all the time, but if this is your question, it's really hard to turn it off. In your mind, you're the one who makes things happen, and you can rest when you're dead. And for these people, I'm sure sometimes they're like, yeah, it'd be great if I could play a sport without just beating myself up afterwards, thinking I wasn't the best. It would be great that if things weren't going well at work, I could go home and still feel like things were going there, but I can't. It'd be great if I didn't feel like a failure when I lost at something I've never done before. And it'd be wonderful if I could ask for help without feeling like I was incompetent or a failure. Because you don't intend to do these things or to think these ways. They just happen. These primal questions, they're called primal questions because they're primal. They're ingrained in us. And until we begin to understand them, we can't change the way we think. You see, when I am successful is your primal question, your impulse is to see everything as a competition you must win. It doesn't matter what area of life we're talking about. It could be a game of basketball, some sort of very important work initiative, an argument with your spouse. You have to win. You also assign worth according to achievements. In your mind, what you have done is who you are. And you hold everybody else to that standard. People around you know that if they want you to think well of them, they need to hit you with all of your accomplishments. These type of people will do anything to appear successful. They're driven to keep up appearances no matter what, and they'll hide or they'll minimize anything that can be perceived as a loss or a failure. These type of people despise being critiqued or questioned. If you critique or question me, the only reason you're doing that is probably because you don't think I can do it. You don't respect me. And it's hard. That can lead to a lot of insecurity. That can cause us to push people away. And these type of people view downtime as a weakness. If you know these people, you know they have a hard time sitting still. Every moment is something that could be optimized. Every moment is either wasted or used for something. So if you have this question, there's a good chance you're in good company. The person that we're going to talk about biblically, we can never know for sure without sitting down and have a conversation with them, but it's pretty likely that he had this question. And he is a man who is heralded as the wisest man who ever lived. If you know your Bible, you know that's Solomon, right? Solomon was a king of Israel, the son of King David. And he was known as the wisest man who ever lived. And he wrote this book, the book of Ecclesiastes, and that's the main place we're going to be in today. So if you brought your Bible, you can open up to Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 2. We're going to start in verse 4. It says this: I also tried to find meaning by building huge homes for myself and by planting beautiful vineyards. I made gardens and parks, filling them with all kinds of fruit trees. I built reservoirs to collect the water to irrigate my many flourishing groves. I bought slaves, both men and women, and others were born into my household. I also owned large herds and flocks, more than any of the kings who had lived in Jerusalem before me. I collected great sums of silver and gold, the treasure of many kings and provinces. I hired wonderful singers, both men and women, and had many beautiful concubines. I had everything a man could desire. Now, for us in 2024, there are some of those things that maybe we wouldn't have included, right? I love when he's bragging about all the groves. We're not quite to there yet. Quit tipping my hand. Right? There are things in there that we wouldn't, but those are the modern equivalent of the trappings of success that we talk about. Right? I had many groves. In those days, you didn't have a sound system. You had to hire singers. He made enough money that he literally hired singers to come and sing and perform for him. It's pretty clear that this person is a person kind of obsessed with letting you know all the cool stuff that they did and all the cool stuff that they have. You see, for Solomon, his definition of what success was achieving all that he could to earn the admiration and the accolades of others. And this isn't just Solomon's definition. If we're being honest, this sounds very familiar to maybe our American idea of success. Maybe we're a little bit humbler about it. We try to accidentally get a picture of our groves or our singers that we've hired, right, in the background. We want people to know that we're killing it. We want people to know that we're successful. And that's what Solomon's doing. And what's interesting is it's actually affirmed later in Scripture. In 1 Kings 4, it talks about Solomon. It seems like he was telling the truth. It says, Solomon's dominion extended over all the kingdoms west of the Euphrates River, from Tipsah to Gaza, and there was peace on all his borders. Solomon had 4,000 stalls for his chariot horses, and he had 12,000 horses. He was wiser than anyone else, including Ethan the Ezrahite and the sons of Mahal, Heman, Calcol, and Darda. His fame spread throughout all the surrounding nations. He composed some 3,000 proverbs and wrote 1,005 songs. He could speak with all authority about all kinds of plants, from the great cedar of Lebanon to the tiny hyssop that grows from the cracks in a wall. He could also speak about animals, birds, small creatures, and fish. And kings from every nation sent their ambassadors to listen to the wisdom of Solomon. So Solomon was like the internet before the internet, right? We're all like, this is great. But he literally had all of this in his mind. I love, too, that it said that he wrote 1,005 songs. I wonder if Solomon had a hand in writing this. He was like, not 1,000, 1,005. So this isn't just Solomon writing in his own book, Ecclesiastes, saying that he's awesome. The writers of 1 Kings say, no, he really was. He extended the wealth and the reach of this tiny nation of Israel. What's interesting about this, though, this unquenchable desire that he has for success is not something that he learned from his dad. It's not something that his father, David, taught him. And we know this because in 1 Kings 2, we hear David's dying words to his son Solomon. It says this in 1 Kings, "As the time of King David's death approached, he gave this charge to his son Solomon. I am going where everyone on earth must someday go. Take courage and be a man. Observe the requirements of the Lord your God and follow all his ways. Keep the decrees, commands, regulations, and laws written in the law of Moses, so that you will be successful in all you do and everywhere you go." Now, I want to keep that up there because that feels kind of complicated, right? That wasn't just like, do your best. No, to keep all of the decrees and commands and regulations. And we might be asking ourselves, what do we take away from that? But fortunately, there was a man who many, many years later, himself a descendant of King David, summed up the entirety of these laws and decrees and commands. And he did so with these words. He said, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." If you don't know who I'm talking about, it is Jesus. In Matthew, he says this, that all of those laws and decrees and commands can all be summed up with these two phrases. If Solomon would have done this, that would have been what David saw as success, what the Lord saw as success. But that's not what Solomon did. In fact, he started off his role as king doing the exact opposite almost immediately. He started to do things that God had commanded him not to do. And he didn't just do it once, he did it a lot. And what's funny about this is if you're like me, growing up in the church, we hear Solomon as a good name, right? Solomon we hold up as he was the wisest man. He wrote Proverbs, he wrote Ecclesiastes. But actually, if you read the biblical narrative, he is seen as a failure because of his inability to do what God had said. We see this in 1 Kings. It says this, "Now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Besides Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, and from among the Hittites. The Lord had clearly instructed the people of Israel, 'You must not marry them, because they will turn your hearts to their gods.' Yet Solomon insisted on loving them anyway." And we see the impact this has. He had 700 wives of royal birth and had 300 concubines. And in fact, they did turn his heart away from the Lord. In Solomon's old age, they turned his heart to worship other gods instead of being completely faithful to the Lord his God, as his father David had been. And you might be asking yourself, why in the world do you need 700 wives? I one time heard a sermon where a guy was like, clearly Solomon was a sex addict. And I wanted to shake him. I was like, I guarantee you this was not about sex. What this was about was success. There's a good chance that some of these marriages may have been consummated sexually, maybe not. This was about success. Every wife that he gained gave him more power, more prestige, spread. These were political marriages. And the more success he had, the more women he married, the further he was pulled from his God. And what's interesting is asking, where did this drive come from? Earlier we talked about the kind of households that people are raised in who have this need for success. And if we think about it, we ask ourselves the question, what kind of father was King David? Well, I have never been a king, but from the outside looking in, it does not seem like a lifestyle that's conducive to being a very good father. But on top of that, here's who David was. David was the guy who famously won an unbeatable war by killing a literal giant with a rock. He was incredibly brave. He was a brilliant warrior, a brilliant military strategist. He freed his people from their longtime oppressors, the big enemies, the Philistines. He established the capital of Jerusalem, and the city was forever called the city of David. Everybody loved him. The royals, the common people, the noblemen, even outlaws. In fact, his first group of soldiers were former outlaws that came over and were like, this guy is pretty cool. He was a self-made man. He went from a poor shepherd to being an incredibly wealthy king. And if that wasn't enough, he was also an incredible musician. Honestly, probably the most influential musician, period. And that's Solomon's dad. That's the guy that he gets to follow. And so you've got to imagine that Solomon is walking under this huge, huge shadow. And interestingly, nobody probably talked about David's mistakes, but the scriptures do point out his mistakes. And one of his biggest, if not his biggest mistake, was when he seduced Bathsheba, a married woman. And Solomon was a child of that union. Solomon was not meant to be king. He was third in line, but after both of his brothers were killed, he's put into this position. And so he knows that every room that he walks into, he has a chip on his shoulder. That's where this drive comes to try and be better than his father. And we actually see this in the passage we read. He says, I had more stuff than the kings of Israel before me. Well, there was only two kings before him, Saul and David. In fact, as we read on in verse 9, it says this, so I became greater than all who had lived in Jerusalem before me, and my wisdom never failed me. He's not even being subtle about it. He's saying, I'm better than my dad. I've done more. And the truth of the matter is, sometimes people who have this question, that's what we're doing. We're trying to one-up our parents. We're chasing the ghost of this idea of our parents. And what's interesting is if we only read that part of Ecclesiastes, we can think that Solomon got to the end of his life and was like, this is awesome. I am so cool. Look at all my stuff. But in verse 10, he continues. He said, anything I wanted, I would take. I denied myself no pleasure. I even found great pleasure in hard work, a reward for all my labors. But as I looked at everything I had worked so hard to accomplish, it was all so meaningless. Like chasing the wind. There was nothing really worthwhile anywhere. So as a caution to someone who thinks like this, Solomon was someone who did it all. Whatever kind of success you think you had, it's hard to compare to the success of Solomon. And yet at the end, he says it's all meaningless. And what probably made it sting all the more is here we see, honestly, Solomon sounds miserable. And yet his father was someone who, when people encountered him, David was a joyful person who seemed to enjoy life. And I'm sure that made it sting all the more. Because the big difference between these two men is not the differences in their accomplishments. As we look at the scriptures, the difference is where they found their acceptance. Solomon craved the acceptance of others. He craved being seen as successful by others. David, throughout his life, was more concerned about how the Lord saw him. There's a story where literally he has taken off his clothes and dancing. And his wife says, this is very undignified for a king. And David said, I will become even more undignified than this. Despite all his accomplishments, David cared so much more about what God said about him. In fact, in 1 Samuel 13, it calls David a man after God's own heart. So while Solomon's racing for the finish line, trying to reach this unending goal, David seems to be living with integrity and enjoying the ride. So the question, whether this is our primal question or not, is how do we live more like David and not like Solomon? And the point is that when we're tempted to settle for looking successful, we have to remind ourselves that being successful is different than looking successful. Because one notable difference between these two men, Solomon expended a lot of effort and time to make him look successful. But David seemed so much more invested in God's idea of success. And we talked about God's idea of success. It's what David told his son on his deathbed. We summed it up in the words of Jesus. God's idea of success is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. David was successful not just because of what he did, but because of who he was. The integrity with which he lived. And I don't know about you, when I think integrity, if integrity were a person, I kind of think of somebody wearing like khakis and like a tucked in button down, right? You don't think of integrity when you think about a really fun person. But when we look at the life of David, we see someone who laughed and made music and was passionate. A lot of his happiness was not connected to his accomplishments. David was living in the moment. He was living to enjoy it. If you've ever read the book of Ecclesiastes, we love to quote that part where it says, meaningless, meaningless, it's all meaningless. If you read the entirety of the book, Solomon seems to come to this realization that he had been chasing these accomplishments and he had missed the point of those accomplishments. He had forgotten to enjoy his life. It even said it in that little part we read. Hard work is good. There is a reward to hard work. There is a reward to having good friendships and loving and good food and all of these things. Part of the point of this life is to enjoy it. To love God and to love others and to enjoy this life. And so for those of us whose question is, am I successful? I wonder if God might want to rearrange your definition of success today. And I wonder if he did, if that would lead to more freedom for you. More freedom to step back and to change how we think about it. Jesus says it this way in Matthew 16. What do you benefit if you gain the whole world but lose your own soul? Is anything worth more than your soul? And we think of the word soul in a very Western way, like your eternal soul. And it does mean that in a sense, but the Hebrew word is actually the word nephesh, and it means the entirety of who you are. Your soul is your entire essence, everything about you. So why gain the whole world, all the success of the world, and yet lose yourself, all of who you are? So if this is your question, if you find yourself fixating on achievement and achieving the admiration and accolades of others, remind yourself what real success is. It's what we summed up, right? Love the Lord your God with all your heart, your soul, and your mind. And Mark, it says, and your strength, with everything of who you are, and to love your neighbors as yourself. We have to remind ourselves that we are not followers of the world. The world has its things that it values. Jesus has a whole different set of values. If we're going to follow Jesus, we need to shift what we see as success. And especially for those of us who have this question, this is so important. So instead of putting all of your focus into the success of your business or your fitness or whatever it is that you find your meaning in, look at your life through that lens of loving the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving others. What could success look like? For me, I like to focus on being successful as a parent, being successful as a spouse. Recently, I've been really, really convicted to be a better friend. I wonder what Solomon's life would have looked like if his dad had been a better dad to him. If David would have loved Solomon better, what his life trajectory would have been. The other thing we can't forget is am I being successful in my relationship with God? Am I carving out the same time for my relationship with the Lord as I am for the success of my business? Because we sing a song here, we introed it about a month ago called Simple Kingdom. It's one of my favorite songs. And in one of the verses it says, your kingdom is backwards. It flows in reverse. What you call a treasure, this world calls a curse. And I love those words because in a traditional kingdom, things flow towards the king, right? All the wealth flows to the king. That's how Solomon and David became so incredibly wealthy. But God's kingdom is backwards. For those of us striving for success, what we need to understand is that everything, all the success, everything we need flows from God to us. And it's not about you earning it. It's not about you being good enough to receive it. It is yours. We live from a place of incredible wealth if we follow Jesus. But that wealth may not look like what we think. Because like we sing, what we call a treasure, this world calls a curse. This world values prestige, money, fame. What Jesus values is people. Even people that this world calls worthless, Jesus values. So why would I gain all the financial success and all the accolades of people who won't show up to my funeral and ignore those who will be at my funeral? Those upon whom I can make the most impact. My friends, my family. Don't align your vision of success with the world. Don't pour your life out chasing more and more and more. If you do, you'll end up like Solomon at the end of his life, holding sand and wishing that he had lived the way his father called him to live. Now, if this isn't your question, but the question of someone you love, when they become really fixated on being successful, encourage them to find joy in the process. Encourage them that it's not only about the success, but enjoying the road. And this is even more important. Remind them that your interest in them isn't based on how impressive they are. This is one of the things that can really break that open for somebody who this is their question. Because even though it's crazy, and even though you try to tell them again and again and again, they on some level believe that your love for them is dependent upon their success. Every time they fail, if you've noticed that they pull away, it's because on some level they believe that your love for them is dependent on their success. And you showing them that this isn't the case is so freeing. It might take them a while to get there, but they need to understand that not only do you love them separate and unconditional from their success, but the Lord does too. And every time I preach, I talk about Sabbath, so we're going to keep it running. I think the practice of Sabbath is so important if you're this type of person. If you're this type of person, you might be an entrepreneur, right? Because you are a go-getter. There are no off days, right? I love seeing those shirts at the gym. No off days. As their joints are screaming and they're, getting cortisone shots you need an off day. Even if you don't think you need an off day. The Lord your God who knows you, it's in the 10 Commandments to take a day off. And part of the reason that it's really hard for these people to take a day off is because to them, everything's dependent on them. And that might even be the case in their business. Maybe you're the sole proprietor. You're the one who keeps the lights on. It is so important for you to take a day. If you can't take a day, that's okay. Take a morning. Turn the phone off. Because when we take a day of rest, what we're saying, Lord, is you are the one who holds up this world, not me. You're the one who sustains my life, not me. You're the one who provides for me, not me. And if this is your question, you need that. And there is freedom. There is freedom in redefining our idea of success. Would you pray with me this morning?
South Hills Church, I just want to take a moment and say thank you for watching our service online. Whether you're watching it for the first time or you're watching it again because you enjoyed the service so much from the weekend, I'd like to take a moment and dive into our giving. Every week we give people the opportunity to give back and give to the local church so that God can continue to bless your lives and bless your finances. Here at South Hills, we believe that everything comes from God. We believe that He's the one that chose us and brought us into this world, gave us our gifts and talents and abilities. And I just want you to know that when we give, we are giving back what God has already given to us. If you've ever seen any of our envelopes at a South Hills campus, you'll see on there that it says Every week at South Hills, your generosity is giving people the opportunity to live a better story. And there's a scripture on there in Matthew chapter 6, verse 21 that says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. So I want to encourage you today to click down below and set up your giving, whether it's for the first time or whether you're doing reoccurring giving. We have 4 ways to give here at South Hills. 1, you can do it in person at any of our campuses through an envelope. Or 2, you can actually text any amount that you would like to 84321. And the 3rd way is to download our Church Center app. I encourage you to do this one because the Church Center app gives you opportunity to stay connected with our church and your campuses. It's a great tool and resource for you to know what's going on. And the 4th way to give is to give online. You can go to southhills.org/give and you can set up your giving there. Whether you're a guest of our church or whether you are a member of our church, or whether you simply just like to watch our services, I encourage you to trust God with your finances so that He can bless and anoint your finances, and you can be trusting God in this journey of living life to the fullest. I love you, and thank you for watching our online service today.